Well done.
Dun, dun.
Well
Yep.
done.
Should we just stare until they realize we're recording? Or
I think they might know by now.
oh, okay.
Because there's always a couple people that start watching initially and they're like, oh boy, Dresden. And then they get, oh no, it's the other podcast.
You say that. People like us for reasons. I don't know.
Yeah, but they like us for other reasons more.
It is interesting that we have a non-zero amount of people who are like on a schedule want to watch us live. And I'm like, okay, it's on
Hey.
YouTube, so you can watch it later.
As long as we start getting them to pay us directly, that would be even better.
Right?
Mhm.
I know the fool in me was dreaming that it was like, if we took all those unique views and turned them into a single dollar, like for $1, you could feed a starving podcast crew yourself. We would have to be professional. I might shave. Like it would be crazy. You know?
Let's not get carried away.
Yeah.
You
I'm
need
just-
$5 for facial hair grooming.
Oh, you're right. That's silly. Let's put that as a tier on the Patreon.
Yep.
What was I thinking?
Yeah, if we get to $50 a month, Justin will do fancy things with his facial hair, either shaving or braiding or putting in beads or something extravagant. It'd have to be
Crop
different every
circles.
month.
Oh, geez. There'd have to be ground rules because I'm not doing like.
Oh, sure.
The ground rules are whatever the top comment says.
No, that would be
maybe not for
$100 a
50.
month.
Yeah, it was like.
Yeah, so for 50, Justin gets creative license, but for $100 a month, top comment wins whatever it is.
Oh my god! All right,
$100 a month
this
is
cold
fine.
open's terrible. Let's
$100 a month, I'll pay that.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's
It'll
what I'm
only
worried
be the
about.
one
Like,
month, but if I get carte blanche,
and the first month is dick butt. So
Yes,
no, I don't.
but
trust
then
you
it would
be
have
that
to
creative.
change because it has to be unique.
yeah, I think the problem with that too is like, I mean, I know it probably looks like I'm all Viking and everything, but it does take me a couple months to get this far. So
Maybe once a quarter.
all right. So
Marketing talk over.
speaking of talking about me, we're talking about damaged characters, of which I am one now. So hopefully that works for you.
You're like my third favorite one.
Right. I'm like
That's high
my third
praise.
favorite one. So
I mean, who is your actual favorite damage character?
So I tried to brainstorm. I don't have a ton that come to mind other than like obviously all of them, right?
I know.
Like it like these in this day and age, like any of the characters that you enjoy probably have a little bit, right? And so talking to my buddy, we're living with them in the short term and everything like that, like a little off left field even for sci-fi fans these days. Maybe it's about to be a little bit more. He was suggesting like Paul Atreides from Dune, which is like, okay, I read it once and I recognize the last name and stuff, but to go down and enumerate the why this character strikes me, I wouldn't be able to fill very much time with that. One of the other suggestions he had was Corbin Dallas from Fifth Element, which I felt was a little bit of a stretch, not in the sense that he wasn't damaged, but is in that wasn't necessarily the focus of it, of the storytelling. Obviously, it's just to get it off our chest and get it out of the way. Dresden comes to mind, even without involving any of the latest books. But again, I was thinking about it this morning, like Butcher doesn't focus on those things. There's been some outcry and some feedback from the fans about even like Grave Peril, and that the monsters got him, right? So he's invariably got PTSD and he's invariably got these other things. But like where you see the damage start to take over is like his interaction with ghouls, especially at Camp Kaboom. That's more, in my mind, what I would imagine like a damaged character. And then you've got the cliche, like, by now it's cliche because it's been so long. You've got Batman. You've got characters along those lines. Your anti-heroes are usually, yeah, sure. Yeah, Joker's another good one. All your anti-hero types. A lot of the DC characters, and even a fair number of the Marvel ones, they've got some tragic backstory element. Spider-Man came to mind because Uncle Ben. I was trying to think if I knew the canon reason for why Tony Stark drinks, but in MCU, it's implied that it's his parents' issues, right? And the fact that they died when he was relatively young, but he was still kind of the party boy at that time. So there's the whole gamut, right? Like it's harder not to think of like a primary character that isn't damaged in some way, especially in the last 20 years, because I feel like a lot of storytelling has taken that darker, more human slant. Like we don't have like even the stuff. I'll try to keep this not being a rant, but even some of the stuff that we're used to not necessarily having to deal with some of those topics, some of your sci-fi fantasy like Star Wars, or some of your high sci-fi like Star Trek and things like that. Like they may introduce some of these topics, but they don't necessarily become an arc, or they don't become this big what to do thing. And then you can flip it on its head and see in the last decade you've got Into Darkness, and it's like, okay, which one of you is not Batman right now? Like I guess we had Simon Cowell as Scotty. He didn't seem to be too damaged, but everybody else is like, I'm Captain Kirk and this is not cool, and you're like violating the Federation's accords and blah blah blah. Who cares? Like I don't need that in my Star Trek. There are 100 other places I can go to get that kind of storytelling, so and rant. But that's what came to mind for me.
Yeah, it's really hard to name a character that I like that isn't damaged. Which, I mean, it could just be the recent zeitgeist of like everyone trending a little bit more towards grimdark, even if not the full-blown grimdark. I have mentioned Glokta from the First Law trilogy. I've only read the first book of it, but he is delightful in how bitter and hateful he is for very good reasons. Like you are very sympathetic to him, and he's an asshole. Yeah, and he wants everyone else to be in pain because he is in pain, and he was not a good person to start with.
So speaking of sympathetic assholes, e.g.
Yes.
I mean, I guess it depends, because there's a bunch of levels of broken. Tony Stark's the most recent one that I found the most endearing because he's easy, and he was the best character in the MCU. You can go back to even a few years. I mean, broken characters in comedy like Zombieland, Tallahassee. He's a great character. He's technically broken. He lost his kid to zombies. I mean, and that plays into the whole, his whole character. You can go back to The Shining, and Jack Nicholson's character is like literally mentally broken.
Right.
So I guess I think it depends on whatever mood I'm in at the time, because there's, that's not a movie I can just watch whenever it's on. That I've got to really be in the mood for something like The Shining, for instance, or, even something like Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, where fucking like everybody's broken.
Right.
That's a fantastic movie.
It's kind of like the underlying theme of that movie, right?
Yeah,
so.
And like that one was really good because I don't want to spoil it because I feel like it would, just to say that what the theme of it really, and how
it's
they
over
come to the
20
end
years
of it.
old, isn't it? So
I don't know.
So I think the moratorium on
I was going to say, we
spoilers
just spoiled a book that came out like 3 weeks ago, last week, so I think people can...
Because they all embrace the pain. Like this, like pain is a reason to like, not to forget something, like, but that's part of the feeling of a relationship, is also dealing with and embracing and even in feeling endeared by the painful moments.
Right.
Like the worst times I ever feel is when I'm fighting with my husband, because the good times are so good, and like at the end when they lay out like the cycle's going to continue again. Okay, I loved it.
Yeah, it's the human condition. Ultimately, at some point, you just got to understand, like, you either do or you don't. And I think the mature thing is to understand and be like, sure, this probably isn't going to be the last time that this happened. Hopefully it's going to be the last time we fight about this specific thing, because, we've dealt with it in an adult manner and healed and moved on. But invariably, we're going to butt heads again, but also not focusing on that, like the point of the relationship is to, and of being human is to chase the highs and to chase the happy times, or at least, even if you've been married for like 10 years, you chase the status quo, because some days that's good enough, but just kind of realize like, yeah, probably I'm still going to be a dick tomorrow. So, just strive to be better. But now I'm telling on myself. So anyway,
Something about the damage itself is very interesting. I just read through a whole bunch of Stormlight books, and I want to talk about spoilers, but I also think Justin really needs to read it, so I don't want to actually spoil it. But all of the characters are damaged in their own way, and each book has its own focus character who gets flashbacks, and those flashbacks tell you what happened and why and how they're dealing with it now, and they're doing it in different ways, but they're like secrets being revealed, and they're so enticing. Something about of like, especially Words of Radiance and Shallan's reveals, it's like that was not what I expected the first time around, and horrifying and amazing at the same time. Yeah,
right.
And they're just getting kind of more in that direction too. Like Oathbringer was really good. I am very excited for Rhythm of War.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to drill in on the whole, like, you know, it's terrible and yet amazing at the same time without, you know, talking about something we shouldn't and is also major spoilers right now. But I'm trying to think of another example along those lines. I mean, so one of the things that comes to mind with the damaged characters is like, so I sort of instituted an unofficial rule for my own purposes for like a rating system when I watched Odd Thomas, I want to say. And Odd Thomas was just like a perfectly acceptable modern fantasy type of thing where it's like he can see spirits and whatever. And I got a little bit more out of it because he seemed to have the sight, right? And so he could see some of the things that I expected Dresden would see and some of that stuff. So I got into it at that level that, you know, non-fans wouldn't necessarily, you know, have something to key in on. But like, partway through the movie or you know the last third or so, there's a twist and I'm like, wait a minute, this movie is mediocre, I'm not supposed to have feels. And so from like then on it was like, all right, any movie that makes me like pulls my heartstrings, probably a 4 out of 5. Like I'm just going to give it that right now, because no matter how mediocre it was and whatever, obviously I was hooked into it, you know. And it just, I don't know, like it's that sort of thing. Some tragedy befalls some character, or you see their tragedy or you see their brokenness. Like,
yeah,
ultimately it hits you in the compassion and it hits you in the empathy, I think is a big part of it, is that, you know, yeah, I know EG doesn't have any, but like the characters that don't have those hooks, right, you're not going to feel anything for, you know. So yeah, to me that's a big part of it, is like, you know, the extras and the kid, like, you know, let's take a random movie, or the one for whatever reason's coming to mind now is The Mist, maybe because we talked about it, you know, a month ago. But like, so you take The Mist, you've got a creature coming through the gate, it grabs the fucking bag boy. In the scheme of things, in the scheme of the story and in the scheme of the universe, nobody gives a shit, right? A teenager is going to get pulled through the gate, he's going to get eaten by a monster, spoilers, you know. But you know, so like, it doesn't matter to the story, it doesn't matter to anything like that. But if you actually, you know, sit back and think about it empathetically, like, that kid had a story, that kid had a life, and that kid had, you know, like his life was cut short, and whatever he was going to do, even if he never left his podunk town, is ended, right? So you can make that story up and whatever, but in the moment, it's more like, this is horrifying, this has happened to a human being. But if this had happened to one of the main characters, where we got a little bit of their life story, and like, oh my God, if it had happened to a father with kids or something, like, it becomes more impactful, you know, like, because there's an emotional capital invested there.
Yeah, you just reminded me of one of the lines I thought was really good in Deadbeat, which, okay, whatever. When someone died, and Butter said, well, at least he didn't have a family, and Harry says, does that actually make it any better?
Right.
No, I guess it doesn't. And we have a normal reaction of like, but think of the kids that are left behind when like they're orphans, or like this, they do have more of a family that is heartbroken because of it. But even without that, people without kids are still missed.
Yeah, they're still people.
Yeah,
I think that's the important thing. Yeah.
Only one of us here has kids, so I guess the other two don't count.
I wouldn't even play that card, but no, like, I have emotional capital invested in you in other ways. It's not the only way to make that pay off, but it's an easy and cheap way, especially as a parent, right? Like as soon as you see like a character with kids, or you see kids involved in some of the situations, like I never enjoyed it. Like I don't know how much it's come up in this group, but I mean, it's almost certainly come up, at least when talking about Game of Thrones, right? Like in my media consumption, I tend to shy away from violence against women and children. Like one of the most brutal scenes leading up to Game of Thrones anyway, that like had this thought in the back of my head, but I had also tried to shield myself from it, was from Leon the Professional, and Gary Oldman's character just runs through the house blasting the entire family.
Mhm.
That's across the line for me, right? Like that's otherwise a great movie. I love it. It's got problems and talk about damaged characters and shit like that, right? But like that's one of the ones that I always had a tough time with, violence against women and children. With having kids, it's so much worse. Like I don't know if that's every parent. I have to kind of assume that it is on some level, but certainly when you see the kids afraid or suffering or whatever, like your parental instincts kick in, and it really is like hard coded into your DNA somewhere, or should be. I don't know. Like I said, I mean, it's not like there aren't plenty of parents who become the villains of those stories and whatnot themselves in the real world. But certainly, like of the media that I enjoy consuming, that's not very high up on the list, So, but in any case, like I said, it's easy to get your hooks into me that way, but it's not necessarily the only thing,
Right. Of the characters that we lost in the recent Dresden book, it was not because of kids or no kids.
Right.
I don't know. One of them was pretty short.
We're not
Definitely kids.
So anyway, so one of the other things I was thinking about was the why, right? Like we can go on the who, we can go on the what, things like that. Mm-hmm. But like why do we like these damaged characters, and why is it that we feel like the stories are better for having them, especially even if like the character you were describing earlier is like all evil and bitter, and you're not that person, but you enjoy reading that character. Any ideas?
So some amount of it is for Glokta, and a couple others I can think of. Downward spirals are still engaging.
Okay.
Well, everyone likes to watch a car wreck. Except me. I think it's annoying as hell when I'm on the highway. But everyone's rubbernecking. Everybody looks at it.
Right.
Yeah. And part of it, he is so human. Like a lot of people like to think of, I would be better than that. I would be the good person. And then a lot of other people realize I would not be a good person. If you put me in his situation, I'd probably just kill myself. But he didn't, possibly because he couldn't. And he just like, so all that can bring him happiness is other people in pain. And some of those characters you care about. And so it's like, who do I want to win? I don't know. In the Mistborn books, there is a character who starts out happy, goes through a terrible depression, and that was one of my favorite parts of that book because it felt more real. Like when he was happy, it felt a little bit surface level, and then when he got like shooken and needed to find answers and wasn't getting them, it was one of the most engaging parts. The change of the character is still engaging, even if it's painful. But then I still think it's something about the catharsis of as they're going through it and maybe getting the answers eventually and getting to that happy moment at the end that is very satisfying. Like the moment when you can stop running a marathon.
Right. Well, and I think we brought it up with one of our previous topics, maybe even, just the whole like, what was the one we did that kind of led into this? The like,
I called it "We Are Masochists" of just like the pain in general,
right?
Like some form of masochism, sadism in fiction.
And didn't we talk about a topic where it's just kind of like it's like emotional training, right? It's like you can experience these deep, hard emotions without any of the actual inherent risk of being damaged. I don't know if it was that episode or it was somewhat recently, but that's floating around my brain right now.
I think it was that episode, and they're very tied together, and there's something about the emotional training and the catharsis by proxy of like, maybe I have problems and I'm not willing to deal with them, but maybe I can deal with in piecemeal by fiction,
right?
Of someone who's doing something approximate but not the same. Like if I have parental issues and reading about another person who has parental issues, maybe I'll be better at dealing with my own. Or I've never come across this, but when it does, I have a blueprint of how to deal with it.
Right.
But that's not everything. In some part, why do I like damaged characters has to do with the fact that they've been burned before. They get more clever. And watching a character be clever is one of my favorite pieces.
Right. I mean, that's definitely, I talk about it all the time with Dresden, like that's definitely, I didn't think about it in those terms until Dresden, was that I enjoyed the clever characters, which probably feeds back to a lot of like the archetypes that I've enjoyed, reading and like out of all the groupings of characters for the various books, like why did I like this one guy over this guy and whatnot, So some of the things that I had noted about, just the characters and why, we might be drawn to them, is that they're more human. So, they're not something that you necessarily like take Michael Carpenter, for example, pre his own injuries, right? Because we don't really see him so much as Sweat before, Small Favor that I can think of. The closest we see him coming to Fall is post his injuries, right? Mm-hmm. So to those points, like not everybody enjoys those characters because they find them self-righteous or judging, which might tell them something about their own, value systems and their own baggage that they have to deal with, right? Because in my mind, he's one of the least judgmental characters, but he's also kind of like superhuman in a way where it just seems like he's untouchable, especially by the situations around him. And he gets grounded and humanized in the sense that like you see his family and that his wife is way more batshit crazy than he is, especially early on, like he is the guy literally standing, holding the line against monsters. And she's the one that's like embodies all the self-righteous, judgy, behaviors you would expect from a diehard Catholic or a paladin, that sort of thing. So in any case, to me, like the human is a big part of it, right?
Mm-hmm. We are all damaged, so seeing it reflected does make them more human. Like if you have a character that's just a role, like this is the hero, he does heroic things.
Right.
This is the hero that is damaged. They're so much more interesting. It's like a subplot to a character, but right. Without it needing to be a real subplot.
Well, in taking a foil, right? So two of the ones, especially coming from like from the superhero genre, for example, like your two foils for paladins are often going to be Captain America and they're going to be Superman, right? And I think people jive a little bit better with Captain America at times because he's not actually bulletproof. He's not actually faster than a speeding bullet, but he's got that like unassailable morality. And it was one of my more favorite ideas that came out of the Marvel Civil War story was that you're not going to come down on the same side you think you are when the government starts drawing hard lines. That's how unassailable Captain America's morality was, is that even if the US government and all of his friends and allies and things in the heroes say, no, this is the way it's got to be because this is the only way we see it forward. He says, yeah, well, you're infringing on freedom. So no, like I'm not going to ascribe to that. And even if that makes me an outlaw, I know they get into it more in the comics. I'm only loosely familiar with that, but you see a fair bit of it in the movies. And then, of course, a very easy foil again across the aisle there is Superman. Superman's more interesting when he's not being super, right? Loads of fans like hate the fact that he's stronger than, or he's faster than a speeding train and he's stronger than a blah and he's invulnerable to bullets and he's got laser vision and what can't he do, right? And there are so many things like even in the recent movies, like he's got to be somewhere else because as soon as Superman takes the field, it's over. It may be fun for a few minutes while he pummels the invulnerable bad guy, but it's over once he hits the field. And so, talk about damaged characters or at least characters that should be, like his entire race is dead and his parents are gone, and they, with their last breath, sent him to Earth. Not maybe not on purpose, depends on the mythology you're following for that, but sent him there. And even still, like, his own family story on Earth, his adoptive parents are somewhat tragic, in a similar kind of Spider-Man sense, for lack of a better way to describe it. And so, like, some of that's more interesting. Or when he's got to be smart to get out of the kryptonite, dealing with Batman and his tricks, or Lex Luthor and his tricks, or whatever. He's not just all of these things. He's also incredibly smart, which, again, he's very Mary Sue in that regard, especially by today's standards. But, he's more interesting when we're not just focused on, okay, well, he can just snuff out this fire by breathing on it real hard, or he can melt through a bank vault with his laser vision or whatever. Like, those aren't the things that necessarily make him interesting, right? So
no, that's why the originals, especially this Superman 2, is still, people hold that up as one of the better superhero movies of all time, especially because of the way they handle Superman in that. Is he's struggling with the idea of wanting to become human, to have the relationship with Lois, and the Kryptonians are coming, so he's got to deal with the fact that there are other survivors to his people, but they're all bad. So it's one of the, it was competently done in a way that they've tried to manufacture recently, with making him dark and edgy and having his dad stand there in the middle of a tornado for no fucking good reason and say, no, you should let these kids die in the bus. And it's like, wait a minute.
Right.
I see what you're trying to do, but you have missed some of the you should read the table of contents again on how to do this.
Right. Well, I'm glad you brought that up, though, because that, I would easily put that in as well. Like, tying it back to my previous point, that it's like, in the last 20 years, we've decided to take a lot of shit that I don't think needs to be edgy and make it edgy, right? Like, one of the prime examples in Star Wars, for example, is like Rogue One. Loved Rogue One. It's one of the best of the new movies, if you ask me. I don't need my rebels running around doing skullduggery, because the whole point of their order and their thing is that they're unassailable again. Like, they're doing what they have to survive, to unseat this, violent and evil power, in my mind, right? Superman, kind of the same thing. Like, it's cool, he has doubts and he's got issues and he's still got a mommy and just all of this stuff, but we don't need to see evil, dark, edgy Superman as like our flagship character, right? Like, that's not what draws me to the character. That's not what I'm after. I'm cool to explore that in a what if, like, you want to have these things. I think the Man of Steel stuff, where they did like, what happened if he landed in Russia instead, or what happened if this, I think that shit is neat as anything, right? Just as much as I think Mirror Star Trek is neat as anything. But I don't necessarily want my like flagship characters to be like, oh yeah, well, what if I just like cut down this building because you were in the way? And I'm like, yeah, what about the 50 floors worth of people? Let's not worry about that. I think Marvel handled it in a lot better way, in a sense that it's like, yeah, these guys do have, they do have feelings, they do make mistakes. You see some of that lead up into Civil War, for example. They make bad calls, and that's why they have these ramifications. But it doesn't feel like a taint on the character. It feels like an enhancement, if that makes sense. Whereas like, Superman is like, okay, well, I'm better than Zod. And we're like, okay, why? And he's like, well, because truth and justice in the American way, right? I'm like, okay, so we're still cool, like flipping buses and killing people and bringing down buildings. And, everybody threw a fit in the first movie about the kill, right? But it's like, come on, bro, Superman is certainly killed. This isn't like we're lying to ourselves about Batman like we have been for 40 years. Superman has almost certainly killed some of these thugs, even on accident, in the meantime. There's all that, but like, it gets a whole lot harder to tell the difference between what Superman and Zod are and they represent, other than like, okay, Superman's not the oppressor, which they kind of bring up in the second, right? Where like he has to go to, it's Batman versus Superman, where he has to go to Congress to testify. that, why are you not just like running around like taking over America? And then they blew up the Senate or whatever it was. And then of course Batman like sees the dark future where Superman does take over, and that's his fear. But
they entirely mishandled the point of Man of Steel. That entire fight should have been Zod's wrecking the place, Superman's doing everything in his power to stop him / defend the other people. Zod should be throwing buses at random passerbys, and Superman's taking the hit for them and just barely fighting him off, and this, that, and the other thing. And he's getting mocked for it because he's getting the shit kicked out of him. But that's what he does.
Right. That's his due. That's. Yeah.
Every time a building goes down that he tried to, okay, so he saves the few stragglers that come out of the building, but it comes down anyway, and he still looks like he's defeated because he couldn't stop that.
Right.
Not he's punching him into a building.
Right.
And we're going
with this, contributing.
We're going with this fake idea that somehow all of Metropolis was like evacuated because they saw the big ship come down. Meanwhile, there's people running around on the streets so that you can feel the weight of this fight. And it's like, you can't have it both ways.
Well, and they address that in Batman versus Superman, which is one of the things that I enjoyed about the first like few minutes of the movie, was like that was a big reason why Bruce Wayne in this universe anyway didn't like Superman, is that it was his fucking building, it was his people coming down, and talk about somebody watching it being powerless to stop it even though he's a superhero. It humanized it in a way that I just felt like they tried to like they danced around it in the first movie. So anyway,
well, I mean, even with that movie, if he does exactly what I just said and they do it better, you can still have Bruce looking out from the from the inside out and still feeling that way, even though because he wasn't there on the ground to see it, he just saw the fringe. But this is why DC movies are bad.
I mean, this is one of them. I'm not even sure it's Exhibit A, but it's up there.
Anything DCEU related.
Yeah.
Pretty much. They managed with Wonder Woman to get 3/4 of a good movie, and then they shit the bed at the end. That's about as close as they've come.
Yeah, there were definitely some flaws. So I'm hoping that the next one's going to be good, but also the premise already.
1984? Oh, God, it's going to be terrible.
Well, it was so funny, too, because we're sitting there and we're watching the movie, right? And they're making such a big deal about, like, World War I is so catastrophic that only a god of war could be involved in it. And I'm like, oh, cool. So they already wrote the sequel then, because boy, do I have a war for you if you thought World War I was bad.
Well, that was another thing where it's like they seemed like they understood the message, and then at the end it was like, nah, he's still there actually doing it. It's like, wait a minute. The whole point is people are perfectly capable of doing this shit on their own. She's fighting an idea,
right? Not
she's actually fighting a little. Like, you could have him in there as a background thing, but to have that big ass punch up and then at the end it's like all the soldiers look like they come out of a spell. Meanwhile, we all know in 20 years they're going to be back at it again. It's like, what are you doing?
Right. Yeah, and then we're just going to skip that. Somehow she's not involved. We're going to do 1984. So, yeah, I think, the only way that it's going to make enough sense to still enjoy at that point is to unhook them from each other, right? They got to be bubble stories somehow, but that sucks because
they can't, because they're bringing back what's his face, Chris Pine.
I know, and that's one of the biggest things that I hate too. Is like, look, guys, I know you're all hot for Chris Pine. I'm sorry, director, if that includes you too. I don't get it, man. Like, I don't even get it remotely. Like, look, I'll tell you right now, perfectly straight, not even interested a little bit. But Chris Evans, Chris Hemsworth, like we could go down the MCU.
So every other Chris you're okay with?
Yeah, right. But Chris Pine, I don't know, man. Maybe it's the fact that he's shit on too many of my childhood favorites, and they decided he's got to be Pretty Boy Kirk or something. But I just, like, even as an actor, like, he just, like, fuck, Wheel of Time, man. Like, you're not doing anything for me. He was the dad in Wheel of Time, right? So.
Wheel of Time isn't made yet. What the fuck are you talking about?
What was the other one then? The one with Oprah as the witch.
Oh my God, that abysmal thing.
The Stand?
No.
What? Wait, no. I'm thinking
that's
A Wrinkle in Time. A Wrinkle in Time.
Wrinkle in Time. Thank you. Sorry. Yeah,
That,
Wrinkle
that
in Time.
atrocious abomination.
Sorry,
Film.
wheel, wrinkle. You know, it
Ugh.
was like 80% the same thing.
It is. Oh my god, that was confusing.
Yeah.
I've never cared about Wrinkle in Time, so I've never put any brain cells into it.
It had good production values, but everything else was just like I haven't read the books, but yeah, it just. So speaking
Bringing
of
back
damaged,
characters.
Go.
So
Wait, we have a topic?
yeah, so bringing back characters who we have lost and mourned sometimes feels cheap. Sometimes it doesn't, but a lot of the times it does.
Gonna happen again.
But Gandalf the White was amazing.
Right.
No, I'm talking about the other thing.
Oh,
Shut up. We're ignoring you on purpose. Usually we invite your
Right.
whatever
but
perspective, but not
I
this
am
time.
fairly confident that one in particular is going to be okay. But like there are a couple of times when like Gandalf the White was a good thing. Like losing him in the first one hurts. Getting him
Right.
back is awesome, and it didn't feel cheap.
Right.
Sometimes it does, which I never cared about Wonder Woman movies either. Haven't seen any of them, and I knew that he died at the end. So why are you bringing him back? What?
Right.
I mean,
It
I
doesn't.
do like Chris Pine as an actor. I think he has great chemistry. I
Because
can
he's the
understand.
only other recognizable character there.
Right. I don't think it's cheap. I think it's pointless. I would just like to clarify that.
It could be
Like,
both.
I get for her character that it was tragic, and I get for her character that it's going to be like, surprise, I'm alive again. But why, where, what, how?
It's only going to be to lose him again anyway, because she's got the whole angst fest in the later movies when they're up to date that he's not alive.
Right.
So we're
I
just
mean,
going to see this guy die twice.
Right. So it is pointless and it is cheap because they're trying to cash in on the rejoicing of him alive, and then you're going to lose him again.
Right.
And
Which
she's
may
gonna
or
have
may
to
not
be the
happen in
one-
this movie, but
No, this time I guarantee you she's the one who's got to sacrifice him as opposed to him doing it. And that's how they're going to try and make it into like, oh, but she had to kill him this time for whatever reason.
sure. I can't think of a reason how, but I'm sure they'll try and shoehorn that in somewhere. So
Or she has to kill the guy who's the reason he's back and therefore lose him. You know,
They did it with-
you understand what I'm getting at.
Nolan
She's gonna be
did it.
responsible for his.
Yeah, Nolan did it with Batman, right? So with Rachel and Two-Face.
Oh yeah, no. Whoever you choose to save is the one you're going to lose. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, but that was fine because A, nobody likes
was awesome.
Rachel, and B, it was a choice that actually led to something.
Right.
Yeah. Those choices are very fun because you have a character like very starkly put into a position, the trolley problem right there of like, do you do the right thing or do you the thing that's going to make you happy?
Right.
That one, happy.
But
happy.
they weren't clever enough to realize that the crazy mastermind who was fucking insane switched them. But when you look back at it, it's so obvious that he would do something like that.
Right. Well, it's the emotional thing that
Yes.
he's all angry. You could make the argument that, oh, he actually did scramble his brain because he was punching him in the face, and he
How?
obviously he didn't. But my point is, there are elements there that you could be like, Bruce could blame himself for that later on, in the same way Harry would if he was sitting there punching someone and then got told the wrong address.
Right. Yep. So is there another example that comes to mind where they might have done it good? Because you had Gandalf the White, and I can't argue the point. Like, and I'm not even sure why that one works.
Well, it's a good question as to why does Gandalf coming back work. I don't really know. Maybe because he feels different. Like
He's
it was
a little
power-up.
different. He's got
Well, he does ascend somewhat.
You're right, but he's got
Yes.
he's got like a little bit of amnesia too, right? Because they're like, "Oh, you're Gandalf the Grey." He's like, "Oh yeah, I remember that name." It's like, "Yeah, bro, it was like yesterday," you know. So
Well, because
I
he
know.
says, he goes out of thought and time. So as far as he's concerned, he's basically back in the ether doing his angel thing and time doesn't exist anymore.
yeah, that's fair. Yeah,
I mean, you could argue, I guess, something like Jon Snow because everyone knew it was coming.
I for one am shocked.
Based on the mechanics of the world, it was whatever.
That setup was good because he did all of the work. I mean, they started at least to do all of the work to make it earned.
Well, yeah, by that point it was. At that
Right.
point, it was just like, all right, we know this is going to happen because it makes sense, and people have been saying this for 10 years that he was probably going to come back. Well, it's easy to do when everyone's fine with it.
Yeah. But it is feel earned. And he feels changed after. Maybe that's a big difference. They can't come back as the same person.
Right.
Because what Jon Snow said is like, I lived and died. I fulfilled my oath. I'm out. Like, fuck this. You had one death.
His watch is over. That's like the whole
Exactly.
thing.
Yeah. And Gandalf the White is different and a bit more mystical. What are other characters that came back and felt okay?
Well, I guess it depends on whether or not you actually come back to life, or if you're just like faking your own death. Because I mean, even going so back as far as like the 1800s, when Conan Doyle brings back Sherlock Holmes so he can make more money, it's like, well, that was cheap, but
Yeah.
okay, he came up with his way,
Right.
and I think it was he faked his own death in the books too, or just
Indiana
decided to
Jones.
retire and didn't tell anyone.
Indiana Jones is another good one. I'm just bringing it up because I love the meme. It's just hilarious. But like when he's on the tank and he like falls off the cliff, and then everyone's like, "Oh my God, Indiana!" And they're all watching him, and then he comes up beside him. That was classically done. So
I thought you were talking about when he went into the lead-lined fridge and survived a nuclear explosion.
yeah, in a bathtub. Yeah, like that's
Oh,
totally
it was a
how that
fridge.
happened.
It was a lead-lined fridge, very specifically, because he made sure to look, and it said made with lead or whatever, so that
Right.
you knew he was obviously going to be safe, even
Of
though
all the shit in the whole movie that they wanted to pay attention to, that was the one thing. Everything else about
they were
that.
like, we know this makes no sense, but if we throw that lead line in there, they'll go like, aha, of
Right.
course, he's fine.
It's like, bro, we're in the 60s, right? Why are we still punching Nazis? Like, what's going on here? So,
No, it was the 50s and it was Russians. It was fine. It was communist.
yeah, sorry.
The
The other
upgraded.
gray uniform goose stepping fucks.
Hey, listen, we only had so many people we could fight from like 1910 on to 1980. So
Right.
And with excursions into Southeast Asia for no reason.
All right, that's a different thing. So,
uh, mm,
so on the list, so we talked about human and whatnot, that they felt a little human, but we've kind of beat around the bush somewhat too. Is that in my opinion, when they, typically the well done characters anyway, when they get damaged, they also get some experience and they get some wisdom, which feeds into their cleverness,
Yes.
right? So those are some other things where it's typically well done. It's like I mean, apparently I'm stuck on this, right? But Batman, right? He loses his parents. He doesn't just wallow into depression for the rest of his life and just piss away his father's money, though there could be an argument made for that. Instead, he decides to go get kung fu training apparently, and buy expensive toys and go punch people for therapy.
that's what you do.
But, yeah, right.
Rich people are different than us, all right?
All he's got to do is pay a fine, and then they just put him right back out on the street. So, but it's stuff like that, or
So I think something about the damaged characters is seeing the ramifications of those choices that look so right in the moment. Ghost Story is like, look, you did all of these things. These are the after effects. Even if you didn't know it, you have to take responsibility for that. Or just like, this is the way that shit falls down. Like, it gets worse. So if you, like the ending of The Mist, it's like you did the thing that made sense, but now you have to live with that for forever.
no, to get a little too graphic, because that's also the ending, right? Like, I was like, man, shit, if I had done that, I would be wrestling one of those guys for a rifle, or I'd be taking a dive under the tank treads, because I am not fucking. There are very few instances where I see a character and I'd be like, oh yeah, suicide's the only way out or whatever, and that's the only way forward for this character, right? Like, I don't. If you need help, get help. There's 800 numbers. There's things. I'm not trying to belittle anybody who has it, right? I'm just trying to say, like, from my own standpoint, I'm insufferable in this regard, where it's just like, yeah, dude, I get bouts of depression. I get times where it's like, yeah, if I just lay here forever and just pass away, what's it going to hurt, right? But in that instance, like I'd be like, nope, I'm out. Anybody got a 357? Give me one round. That's
Doesn't
all
even
I
need to be that much.
Yeah.
Yeah. That
So
the ripple effects that you can't see, but like one of the things that I enjoy about fiction is that they can take an idea at least, and explore it. And like Watchmen, of like, you have superheroes, and then people get scared, and who watches the Watchmen? And not all of those people are stable. And what are the fuck they gonna do?
None of them are stable, in fact. Like
Pretty much.
maybe Owl Dude. I can't remember it.
Yeah, I mean,
he's got his own.
I mean, he's got problems, but his are almost acceptable compared to what we're used to dealing with
he's
our
much
heroes.
more stable.
Well, yeah,
than
sure.
the
He's
rest.
not the comedian. He's not Rorschach, and he's not an unfeelable god like
Right.
Dr. Manhattan.
And even Silk Spectre. I mean, she's got mommy issues on top of everything else. Like
she's a rape child. I mean, she's
right. Yeah, that's fair. So, anyway, sorry. Continue your point.
It's just like, what did those life choices do to those people? And what
it pretty much gets
around them? It's like, it's all of like
Right.
that was a great movie. I have not watched the comics.
Really, you haven't watched the comics?
Yeah. Put it on your reading list. Be warned, it's some of the most graphic shit as well. Like it.
I have loved Berserk. I can deal with graphic. I just haven't gotten around to doing it. And Berserk is another thing of like, damaged characters. Why am I enjoying this? Holy shit, is that graphic?
Right.
But I was horrified. And I did nothing but like 4 days in the middle of a move. I timed it horribly. Of like, I have to read this right now. And I'm not spoiling a damn thing in that, but like the building of the ramifications of like, you did this thing, now it happens to everyone else. It's not all in a vacuum.
Share the wealth.
I think she wants me to read it. That's why she's.
Well, I don't want to spoil.
Well, all these things are geared towards you because I'm never going to.
I don't think you would enjoy it. I mean, you might enjoy the concept of it, but it is extremely graphic. And if I say with some of what, we will be demonetized.
Those are the first 3 banned words on the list. So
pretty much. But it explores evil people and why they become evil. And there's like, there's these weird little egg-faced things, and they're creepy as all hell. And if you get one, there are sometimes, if you're the right person in the right place, you get a choice. You can sacrifice the people who are most important to you to become a demigod or a monster or whatever, get whatever it is that you wanted. And so what are the people who are doing it? Like, why did this kid, like a 13-year-old girl, sacrifice her parents? What led to her doing that?
Right.
And just because she got the thing that she thought she wanted, she's still not happy.
Right.
Or all of the other people who do the same thing of like, sometimes they're just outright evil, terrible people, the most despicable kind of person, and they just wanted to continue doing more of that. Like the worst warlords just continue. But sometimes it's much more complicated.
Like your parents were abusive.
Or maybe not always abusive. Or like the girl in question, she's a lot like Spectre. So when she has an out. She has a fantasy land where she thinks she can go. And I mean, this is just one little arc inside of a much larger world, but it's one that comes to mind often of like, that was weirdly compelling.
Gotcha.
And some of the damaged characters become the monsters themselves, as we know we enjoy.
Well, I mean, that's what it takes to, it's a big part of being a compelling villain, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that these guys are human and they either think that they're right and they're making bad choices, or they're human and they're just making bad choices. I mean, without going back to the well that we're all trying to avoid, if you've seen, so again, spoilers, I don't remember exactly when this came out, but I think it's been a couple years, but you do Avatar Korra, right? one of the ones that strikes me there, I know you may not have the experience there, but there was a character named Kavira, right? She's the main villain in season 4, and she basically gets handed a mandate that says, "Hey, you know, the kingdom is kind of in a state of disarray. We need somebody to go kind of get everything back on track, so that once we find the heir to the kingdom, they can take back over." And while she's out doing all this work and whatever, she's like, why? Why am I doing all this work to hand it over to somebody else so that things can go back the way that they were? And she basically becomes a warlord. You know, like you can sense a lot of post-apocalyptic vibes. You know, like the whole, yeah, sure, we've got all the forces, but we've also got all the access to food and the logistics. So every time she conquered a place wasn't necessarily a fight, right? But she was certainly ready for a fight as well. You know, that sort of thing. But it was just definitely one of those things where it's like she was raised by some of the characters who would otherwise be classified as heroes. She was adjacent to these guys and all of this stuff. And then as soon as she gets a little bit of power, she just like takes it and runs, you know? So just concepts like that, where it's like, you know, you're not like, I can see where your path went wrong, you know, like you're trying to do the right thing, or you're trying to help people or whatever, but you took the left turn when you shouldn't have or whatever. Whereas like, you know, Joker's batshit fucking crazy, you know, like what made him more compelling with Heath Ledger's thing was the crazy and the damaged and whatever, and focusing on that. You know, the animated series Joker as well does a decent job of that, instead of just being zany, right? You know, because that shit gets old after a while. But you know, having some of your other characters which are like clearly evil, but you know, you can't quite bring them down inside the law because they've always got their tracks covered, you know. You know, your mobster types, you know who I'm talking about. But anyway, so just things like that, where, you know, those are kind of compelling characters, and many of them are often damaged as well. You know, they go, it's like they overcorrect, you know, in some cases, like they experience some tragedy or some tragedy by proxy, and then their entire thing is like, you know, nobody gets to hurt anymore, and then somehow it gets twisted and they're the one doing the hurting, you know. I think is it Nietzsche, the whole, you know, if you look into the abyss looks into you, and
I think so.
You know, if you hunt monsters, then, you know, when do you also become a monster? I don't remember everything exactly, but you know, it's some of those ideas, you know, like at the very least, by like today's standards, you'd expect somebody like that to be an anti-hero, if not, you know, just like straight up turn into a gibbering villain at some point. You know.
Have you guys played Last of Us, the first one?
No.
Mm.
Yeah. I don't do PlayStation exclusives, right? And that one isn't it? So,
I don't do video games.
Yeah.
So would you care if I spoiled it?
I know what happens. I know what happens in that one and The Last of Us too, because it's one of those things that everyone
because
he up in arms about.
He likes drama, so he seeks that.
No,
shit.
I very much don't. I would like people to go back to doing things where they write.
But you get to feel superior when you read other people being idiots. And I think you do seek it out. You're an addict, and you won't admit it.
I'm very secure in my sense of superiority over other human beings, that I don't need to seek it out.
So The Last of Us, the first one, is something where you are following along with characters and you enjoy them. But in post-apocalyptic, zombies, everything. And then the main character makes the wrong choice. Mm-hmm. And you know it is the wrong choice. He knows it's the wrong choice, but he doesn't give a damn. And then the little girl is very suspicious because it was not what she would have made either. But it damns them for forever, pretty much. He takes away the ability to save the rest of civilization.
Isn't that kind of overstated?
I don't know.
Well, because as far as I understand, again, having not played it, was so you go through this game where it's the guy and the girl becomes basically his surrogate daughter. Mm-hmm. She's got some sort of enzyme or something that allows her to be immune to turning into a zombie. And there's this faction that wants to harvest it out of her in order to whatever, make a vaccine, whatever it's going to be. They throw him out without his weapons and are essentially going to kill her without her knowing they're going to kill her.
No, she knows it.
Okay, fine.
It's on her brain. She knows that for them to harvest it, they have to harvest her brain.
Fine.
And she is accepting of that.
And that, okay, so they do that, and then he goes back in and decides he wants to rescue her instead.
Yeah, he kills all of the doctors who were even potentially capable of doing anything like that. So even if they found another person who was like that, but most of the time, like, oh, you're bitten, you're dead now. Like, it was only an accident that she survived.
Does this vaccine reverse you turning into a zombie?
Well, she didn't turn at all.
No, I mean
And
anyone.
so
Like they're trying to
that,
get
like,
this thing. Are they trying to get this thing to cure people, or are they trying to get this thing to prevent more from happening?
To keep people non-zombies if they get bitten was the idea. So they could keep them as static as her,
but not revert the
yeah. I mean,
infection.
like if you're exposed to it, you are exposed.
Okay.
But so they can't cure that, but they were hoping to at least people so that they're not crazy. I think. And she knew that it was going to kill her, but it was worth it to her because of all the people that she lost. Because when she got bitten, it was also with her best friend, lover person, sort of. And she watched that person lose it. And she was sane. And so this has to not ever happen again. And he saved her, contrary to her wishes, killed the faction almost entirely of the people who were going to try to do that. He made the wrong choice in almost every objective sense. But he did it because he didn't want to lose his daughter again.
You know.
Yes. But even contrary to her wishes, she didn't want to live. She wanted everyone else to live.
That's a deeper episode than we've got 5 minutes for, but you know, because at that point, like, you know, overdose, suicide, you know, like we can go down the list of where things like that happen. This is just like, you know, suicide with extra steps, and we get to feel better about it afterwards, right? So like the argument could be made, certainly there was murder involved, things like that, you know, wrecking potentially the hope of, you know, the rest of humanity regardless. Like I'm definitely a fan of the Kobayashi Maru, and there's always option C. You know, there's always going to be another way. We don't necessarily have to be like, we either kill her or we don't, and this is our only chance. Like, obviously, you know, we can figure another way out, but that's the story they were telling apparently. So I get you. Like, yeah, by and large, you know, he decided to run over those 6 people on the track instead of the one.
Yeah. I mean, they also do other things showing he is a monster of a person.
Mm-hmm.
He admits that he was sometimes the bandit that killed others to get their stuff.
Right.
He was not a good person who just made the impossible choice of I'm saving my surrogate daughter. He always makes the selfish choice.
Right. Sounds like some of those nerds should have got some weapons. Maybe that wouldn't have happened.
It's probably what I would do. I can't feel bad for the utilitarian viewpoint. I do in an abstract sense, but unless it's curing everyone in the world, it's like, all right, so the world's still fucked.
The zombies are zombies. Like, let's derail this entirely, right? If we get into this, right? Because zombies has been like my choice genre for at least the last 20 years or so, even when people are like, oh, we're too saturated and this shit's going to blow over. And then here's the MCU. But in any case, like I followed it all the way around the bend, right? Like, let's put ourselves in this dude's situation. Let's flip it the other way, right? So you've run around, you've killed zombies to survive. You've killed zombies maybe when you didn't have to and whatever. They used to be people. You take her in, she survives, it doesn't matter, whatever. There's a cure. If they can cure the infected people or not makes a big difference, especially in the aftermath, right? Because if they can't cure the zombies, then basically they were already dead and it doesn't matter, right?
Right. So it wasn't the hope
standards.
of saving the zombies. It was the
Right.
hope of saving the people who are remaining.
But if you can at least stop further infections, eventually that'll run its course. Like most diseases that get vaccines, you'll be able to virtually eradicate it. Maybe you'll have it crop up in some third world country every now and again, or some backwards village or something. But you wouldn't necessarily have another outbreak until it mutates, which the zombie genre is a huge fan of that shit mutates all the time anyway, right? But the one that gets me is like, so say it was a vaccine that cured these people. I killed a bunch of zombies. In fact, I didn't even go out of my way to not kill them. So am I going to be brought up on war crimes trials because I killed a bunch of people because now we've got a vaccine that can save people? Because that's the one that I'm like, just so we're clear, I'm still shooting the zombies.
Go one step further than that. So you're in a post-apocalypse where humans are basically like down to as low as you can be without
1%.
Anything more than like what, a fortified town of a couple hundred, maybe a couple thousand people tops.
Right.
So you've got a faction that's sure or not willing to kill a little girl to get it.
Mm-hmm.
Do you trust them? One, their capabilities to get it to the entire world.
Right.
You're in a post-apocalyptic.
Post-apocalypse. Yeah.
Do they have that ability? Number one. Number two, I imagine this is the kind of thing where there's lots of factions fighting each other. That's the kind of thing that leads to like despotism. You have a cure for this thing, or you have something even that just keeps you from getting sick. That just furthers the post-apocalypse as far as I can tell. Because you're going to have this one thing with power that's either going to lead to a war where it all gets destroyed or one faction in control. And I don't think they're going to be that,
not freedom, truth, justice, and all that stuff.
Yeah, they're not going to be as gregarious and open with it as you might think.
Right. Well, I mean, in my perspective, I mean, that's a very nihilist point of view, though, right? Is that I would rather the race go extinct than save it at the cost of this, because, I mean, sure, right, from a moral and ethical standpoint, like the fact that they're going to take over and the fact that they're going to be despots and all of these things, because we've seen that shit through history, that's not great, but neither is extinction. Also, the fact that given enough time, things tend towards democracy. At least that's what we've been taught in school, right? So like eventually that faction's going to get so large, they're going to have their own infighting. Those factions are going to split off. Like, it's not like they're going to be 1984 and just control everything going forward. Like, it's never really happened in history so far anyway, despite what you might see in the political climate now. So it just, to me, yeah, it's the ultimate utilitarian distinction is, do we go to oblivion or do we save the species? Yeah, we can argue the ramifications of like, okay, well, these guys were obviously clearly some shade of evil to experiment on humans and sacrifice them and, all of this other stuff. But it's the ultimate means to an ends, right? Do we justify the means or the ends? Because, you're like, well, I'd rather us have oblivion because we're not going to break the break the moral barrier here. Whereas like, do we do literally anything to save the species? Thanks for coming to my TED Talk.
You really need to read Stormlight.
Okay.
And if you want the audiobooks, they're like 50 plus hours. They will keep you occupied.
Yeah, I'm thinking, I'm sure you have. You should just send me what the first one is, and then I'll just figure it out from there. So
yeah. Yes, you will enjoy the moral quandaries.
Yeah, I've got a minimum of like 6 months before the next Butcher book comes out, so now's a good time to get back into some other stuff.
Yeah, and the fourth book of Stormlight's coming out in November, so you've got some catching up to do, and it will take you some time. The questions of what is right is very prevalent in there,
specifically when dealing with genocide and extinction, since that's the topic we're on right now.
Not quite genocide. Yes.
Right.
There are lots of characters doing bad things for the right reasons, and their justifications are not flimsy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it hurts them, and they do it anyway, like fully knowingly. This is still the right thing to do, even with all of that terribleness. Right. But we are at an hour. We can do a part 2 if we need to talk about more damaged characters as we consume more fiction.
E.g., are you damaged enough?
Listen, I am basically in the Superman category. You can't touch me.
Right. Indeed.
I am both the unstoppable force and the immovable object.
That's hot.
Get on my level.
Ready. Well, plug our things.
We have no things. This is
We
our
have
thing.
we have things.
Well, yeah, we have the other thing. Some of you who actually care about the Dresden Files, which appears to be more of you than not. We're still gonna. I think we're still having Jim on next week.
We're supposed to.
Right.
Yeah, but
we're-
did you confirm that?
I sent the email this morning.
Damn it!
I know you did.
What were you told? What were you told?
She doesn't always make the right choices, okay? It's
Yeah.
part of being human.
You're trying to talk about this guy who may or may not have not even presented a zombie apocalypse, and you can't even do this.
I put
You're
it on the.
the
I
first person.
confirmed it. I set it up in like August or something like
irrelevant.
that. And then
It's been a long
yeah.
apocalypse since then, man.
Yes, I sent the email, and I mentioned we're hoping to get a lot of lore questions, so I hope he has his notes handy. 'Cause we are going for all the questions that have not been asked yet to
Right.
learn more things and get
Oh.
info.
Subject to change. We're going to have the author on and harass him next week.
Right.
Yes, and we are taking suggestions for questions. I'm compiling them into a document slowly.
Whatever your questions are, make sure they're your best ones, and then really think about it before you send it, and then then revise them to make them really, really good.
Yes,
In
and-
order, our favorites are time travel.
No,
Who's had sex
no,
with who?
No,
Man-
Who's had
Mantles?
sex with
No.
who while time traveling?
No.
Yeah.
any one of you that brings up time travel, Mantles, Butters, or Randy, you're getting ignored. Immediately ignored.
So just know this.
The
that
director's doing the questions, so not
I
you.
am
She's
compiling
compiling a
into-
list that doesn't control the rest of us.
Yes, you might have to go through the EG filter.
It's a
So-
very strict filter.
Yeah.
Realistically, it's not that strict. I mean, these should be common things.
Right.
Right, but if you know the answer, then I'm not interested because you will tell me the answer and I will know it all.
Yes. Oh, no, yeah, I will be going through the questions, and if they're already word of Jim's answering them, they're getting nixed.
Right.
All right.
I've nothing to do with my life.
So actually tune in next time, I guess. Because otherwise we'll just be back at this in 2 weeks.
I was going to
with
say, you're
another
going to be
topic.
hyping people up for this and just be like, well, I sent the email, but.
I sent it. I
Yeah.
put it on the calendar months ago.
Yeah.
I did my work.
Imagine following up with people. What
Don't
kind
do
of
that.
director
We're
would
not
do that?
professional.
What kind of director would do that?
The one that doesn't get paid.